Going for a big one. Is it going to be caught? And it's a magnificent catch. We saw a great catch out there by Brearley, and this is Richards, who's really taken a superlative catch on the fence. The whole West Indian team converging on him.
He faces Kumble again. Pulls this, and that's it. That's 4 runs. It was a beautiful, inviting delivery for him, short-pitched, and he pulled it away past mid-wicket, and Gooch goes in this historic and magnificent summer for him to another Test century.
Let's mash it ball again. No wicket for 22, and he's on his way now from the nursery end to boycott. Bowled him! Right through him.
Here's the Freitas now to Logie. On drives 4 runs, the match is over. The West Indies have won by 8 wickets to take the series 4-0.
England striving for this last wicket. They've been doing that for a while. Harmison comes up and bowls, and Kasparovich goes back and parries one as he caught down the leg side. There's an appeal for the catch. He's out. England have won. England have won by 2 runs.
Well, for the remainder of the programme, we're going to talk about John Arlott, who commentated on every home Test match from 1946 till the end of the 1980 season. He went from Hampshire policeman to cricket commentator after these words of encouragement from that man again, the BBC's Seymour de Lotbiniere.
His old lobby said, I listened to you, he said, I think you've got a very vulgar voice. Matter of fact, he said, can't understand why people want to listen to it. He said, but you've got an interesting mind, he said, and I think you'd better continue. He was pretty good, Lobby, really. He was a harsh critic, but his criticisms were invariably right. And of course mine was and is a vulgar voice.
For many of our young listeners, they won't have heard his distinctive descriptive commentary before, for many of our younger listeners. So here are 2 good examples. This is Arlott describing Eddie Barlow's hat-trick for the rest of the world against England at Headingley in 1970.
The ball comes back to him, he turns and walks back, his shirt out at the back, broad-backed, strong-looking, stocky. He comes in, bowls to Norton, bowls him, and spreads his stumps like twigs. 219 for 7. They all get down then, and in comes Barlow now to Wilson. Bowls to him, he goes forward and it pops up, and he's caught a forward short leg, and Barlow is poised in an altogether different melodramatic pose which says, done it at last. And he has got his hat-trick. Well, I've only ever seen 2 Test hat-tricks in my life. They were both on this same ground and both at about the same time of day.
TMS listener Patrick Jacks has requested hearing the beautiful John Arlott describing Clive Lloyd's batting in the 1975 World Cup final.
Now difficult, not only to bowl a maiden over, but apparently to bowl a maiden ball. Gilmore comes in, bowls, and Lloyd hits him high away over mid-wicket for 4. The stroke of a man knocking a thistle top off with a walking stick. No trouble at all. And it takes Lloyd to 99.
I guess that's a line and a half, isn't it? The stroke of a man knocking a thistle top off with a walking stick.
It is tricky because he was a canny so-and-so, John, obviously, because I nearly fell out of my chair while reading the wonderful book on Harold Larwood, and the description of George Gunn by one Dudley Carew, and this is the start of the 20th century. He said of Gunn, he could walk away from a fast bowler and cut him past point with the action of a man decapitating a dandelion with a walking stick. John was well read.
Yes.
And we all do it. We all borrow people's bits. But I mean, and obviously he said it beautifully. But Dudley Carew actually wrote that of George Gunn. Very descriptive.
It was better than a kicking horse, wasn't it?
Well, absolutely fantastic. Just one other here as well. Alan H. I hope this is not... I don't think this is a myth. I just don't know who it's about. In my opinion, the finest Arlott, the master of giving the listener a precise picture in a simple phrase. My favourite, his perfect description of the unique way that Richard Hadley started his run-up, like Groucho Marx pursuing a blonde.
Asif Masood.
Was it? But he said it, didn't he? But I mean,
yes, he
said it. We just don't know who the bowler was.
It was the Pakistani opening bowler, Asif Masood, who John has once called Massive Arsood once by mistake. He was the one who had that rather strange approach, but that was who he was talking about. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it's a voice of whatever you want to call it, isn't it? Rich chocolate cake and amongst many other things.
I always think of him as it were, the John Peel of cricket commentators. And one of the reasons for that is this wonderful rhythm that his voice had. And it was a way in which also, I think, that he was giving himself just an extra split second to find exactly the right descriptive words. There's an amazing art to the clear head that enables you to do that.
What strikes me about John Arlott, and again, we never really heard it because we were playing it and young and so on, but he's in tune. If you listen to his voice, it's actually like he's almost singing a tune set against the background noise. It is harmonious. That's what's so lovely about listening to John Arlott.
I've been speaking to David Raven Allen as well. He was his biographer and was close friends with Arlott for 25 years. And we started talking about Arlott's journey into the commentary box.
He went from policeman to detective sergeant and then started writing to all the litterateurs of the time, which prefaced a career as literary programs producer in the overseas service, in which he was producing a program called Book of Verse with all the great litterateurs of the time, people like Betjeman, Louis MacNeice, Cecil Day-Lewis, Dylan Thomas and all that. And I think being steeped in poetry for, 3 years, probably more than that, all added to that. Plus the fact, of course, he had that extraordinary voice. It's very difficult today, actually, to sort of realise that just after the war, there were only about, Ralph Whiteman, A.G. Street, Wilfred Pickles, just a handful of people speaking with regional accents. And John felt very out of place and once tried to actually change his voice until Valentine Dahl, the man in black, told him he'd tear his tongue out because he said he would be destroying your passport to fame.
And there was a suggestion that when he was a policeman and writing poetry, that he sent some of it to John Betjeman for his comments. Is there truth to that story?
Absolutely, he did. And Betjeman introduced him to Geoffrey Grigson, a West of England producer, who brought him on air as an actor and reading some of his poems. You know, not all of them were on cricket, in fact, very few. And John was a bit averse to that initially because he felt that he didn't want to be known as a freak, a policeman poet. But he soon came round, and of course that helped as well.
And then from 1946 till the end of the 1980 season, he covered every single home test match. That
Absolutely.
is a phenomenally long innings.
It certainly is. I mean, I don't know how many that is, Mark, but it's a hell of a lot. And, I mean, the things that made him different from commentators now was not only the voice, but, I mean, it was the bon mots that he came out with. I mean, you know, remember the old Middlesex fast-medium bowler, Vincent van der Bijl, and he'd come out with Vincent van der Bijl, ball pate gleaming in the sun, looking remarkably like Lord Longford, but not nearly so tolerant. He would come out with things like that, you know, off the cuff.
Well, I mean, the Clive Lloyd, the famous one, the 1975 World Cup final, the stroke of a man knocking a thistle top off with a walking stick.
Yeah.
Was that just instinctive? I mean, he didn't plan any of this, presumably, did it? It really was off the cuff, and because he had such a poetic bent, it came to him so naturally.
I think you're basically right. I think most of them came off the cuff. I think a few might have been prepared, you know, for a situation that's likely to happen. But, I mean, he would say sort of the thing, or what, Ernie Toshak's batting, like an old lady poking with her umbrella at a wasp's nest. But some of it might have been semi-prepared. You know, his bat has as many holes in it as a Henry Moore sculpture. But I think a lot of it was spontaneous.
When it came to his love of wine, how much of a role did that play in cricket commentary? In other words, you know, did he feel that he was sometimes even better after lunch? Can we put it that way, David?
Well, he certainly was sometimes. A lot of people thought that old battered briefcase contained copies of Wisdom, but of course it was bottles of Beaujolais or claret. He was often a man who rose to the occasion. If there was something really exciting, he would rise to it. I mean, witness the freaker commentary, which everybody knows, you know. And then there was a time, of course, in the West Country where he was in the box with a tyro commentator who was aware that he was sharing a box with the great John Arlott and tried to match up, quite understandably. But every time a batsman made a stroke or a fieldsman made a smart bit of fielding, he would tag it with, and the sun is sinking slowly in the west. And in the end, of course, John got a bit exasperated and said, by the way, Bertie Bruce is going back to the river and comes in. And by the way, over his right shoulder, the sun is still sinking slowly in the west. And if by chance it should decide to sink anywhere else, we shall be the first to let you know.
What was he like to work with? I mean, what was his character like, John Arlott?
John was a lovely man. I mean, I've never known anybody could be more helpful to people starting or encouragement. He could be lugubrious, or people thought that. He didn't have any time for small talk. Everything he said was to the point, and if he hadn't got anything to say, he wouldn't say anything. So some people found that a little bit uncomfortable. But for people who knew him, they realised, of course, that this was just John. And I mean, after his son died, for instance, in that tragic accident on his 21st birthday, John always wore a black tie ever since when there was an occasion to wear a tie. And he never really got over that, which is understandable. He was a very emotional man, totally emotional.
Let me quickly tell you about the Brazil-England match, which is supposed to be taking place on Sunday. It's been suspended for now over concerns about public safety at the refurbished Maracanã. Football's governing body in Brazil is reported to say it's aware of a judge's ruling, but is confident the game will still go ahead. Back to John Arlott. Maybe not quite so off the cuff then with the old Thistle after what you just read out there.
But we all prepare things. Yeah. You're sitting in your car, driving down to a match, and you think of a line, and if you're smart enough, you've got something with you, you can quickly jot it down and not forget it. So I think that's, I mean, a lot off the cuff, a lot of description, but yeah, of course, you do think of things that you're going to say.
I think that enhances it anyway, the fact that preparation has gone into it, thought has gone into it all, that you've got these thoughts in the back of your mind, and there'll be a moment in the coverage of the match that afternoon where you can pull it out. And I think that's great, actually.
Bob, I'm just thinking John Arlott's probably president of the Deep Voice Club, but you must be vice president, aren't you? You're happy to be in that club, aren't you?
I tell you something, though, it's interesting to hear him talk about the producer, as it were, that brought him into
lobby. Yes,
yes, because when I first started on the BBC in 1970, it was pretty strict then, and I had a hard taskmaster to whom I've always been so grateful for the knowledge he imparted to me, and that was my first producer, Jeff Griffin, and it was John Peel, actually, that introduced me to him. Now, it was Jeff that instilled into me all the disciplines, the timing, the pace, the everything. Program building, how to construct a show, how to make this link last that bit longer, or this one to shorten, or whatever it is, And I think the BBC in those days, that was part of the rite of passage, wasn't it? Yes. To get in front of a microphone, that you did have somebody or a group of people that really taught you the basics of how to do it.
And listening to him describing that hat-trick. And that was a hat-trick. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine describing a hat-trick now in Test cricket? And there's a hat-trick. And I'll take one I've seen, actually. But there we go. And what's the score? It was amazing, isn't it? Yes.
I'm about to we're going to hear him describe one of the most famous wickets in Test history. Here he is then. His commentary, says Hugo Freeman, on Don Bradman's final innings remains the seminal moment. To be able to respond to the shock with such humanity and empathy captures the essence of both John and the moment. Sydney Redhead in Grimsby says he remembers listening to Bradman's last innings. Here it is then, Oval 1948. Remember, Bradman needs just four, to register a Test career average of 100.
Well, I don't think I'm as deadly as you are, Rex. I don't expect to get a wicket, but it's rather good to be here when Don Bradman comes in to bat his last Test. And now here's Hollies to bowl to him from the Vauxhall end. He bowls, Bradman goes back across his wicket and pushes the ball gently in the direction of the Houses of Parliament, which are out beyond mid-off. It doesn't go that far, it merely goes to Watkins at silly mid-off. No runs, still 117 for one. Two slips, a silly mid-off and a forward short leg close to him as Hollies pitches the ball up slowly and he's bowled.
Now just listen there, that John Arlott is saying nothing. He's just allowing the applause at the Oval, and the shock almost, just to seep through the airwaves, I guess.
He still hasn't spoken.
No, it's 30 seconds, we timed it. 30 seconds he doesn't speak for, just the applause.
It is remarkable, isn't it? I mean, you'd be champing to say something.
Bradman.
Incredible.
Bowled, Hollies, naught. What do you say under those circumstances? I wonder if you see a ball very clearly. In your last test in England, a ground where you played out some of the biggest cricket of your life, and where the opposing team have just stood round you and given you 3 cheers, and the crowd has clapped you all the way to the wicket. I wonder if you really see the ball at all.
Wow. That was a Benodian pause, if ever there was one, wasn't it?
I don't think even Benno could go that long.
Well, that was amazing, just to let, because, everybody's feeling shock, aren't they? But the crowd, very respectful and applauding the greatest batsman they've ever seen. And he's
you'd have had a producer shouting at you, say something.
Yeah. Well, then we got his line gone down.
But he loved cricketers. He just loved cricketers, and that comes over.
Yeah, but the modern commentator actually would have been drilled into describing him walking off, which again, up the steps and away, which again would have been very. John would have done it absolutely beautifully. Yeah. He just went for that.
What do you think he would have made of 2020?
Well, he did the John Player League, of course, when he was 40. That was pretty revolutionary in those days. I'll tell you what, Johners would have loved. He'd have loved email and Twitter and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, these people, they would have adapted brilliantly to the modern game.
So we've heard Don Bradman, Neil Carter, Bill Walker and Darren Parmiter have got in touch to request this famous clip from England against Australia at Lord's 1975.
Owl is bringing warmer what? Glass of water. And a freaker. They've got a freaker down the wicket now, not very shapely, and it's masculine. And I would think it's seen the last of its cricket for the day. The police are mustered, so are the cameramen, and Greg Chappell. And now he's had his load, he's being embraced by a blonde policeman. And this may be his last public appearance, but what a splendid one.
There was that tinge of disappointment when he said, and it's masculine.
But I love the way he said, it's masculine. It's masculine.
Freaker from?
I asked David Raven Allen that. I said, where did the word freaker come from? And the honest truth is he didn't know. It's bizarre, because when I heard that, lots of times growing up, I thought I must have misheard him, and he said it's...
I don't think there were many streakers around. It's the first phase of streakers.
Of what it was. And he almost got it right, but not entirely, but legendary. Was it Michelangelo? Was he the chap who... I think he was the name of the freaker.
Was he? Fantastic, Aggers, if you know that.
It was a ridiculous name, but I think it was...
Not very shapely, and it's masculine. Absolutely wonderful. Jed Sweeney says, I'm not sure if my memory's cheating me, but when Arlott signed off TMS for the last time in 1980, did the listening crowd give him an ovation?
Well, you know how he signed off, don't you?
He said, next, Christopher Martin Jenkins.
Well, yeah, after a word from Trevor Bailey, it'll be Christopher Martin Jenkins. And the crowd did. He used to stop his commentary very early on in the day, about tea time. He wouldn't do any after tea, because he was writing for The Guardian.
Yeah.
And he never did any in the afternoon session.
It was announced,
final session.
Announced to the PA at Lord's.
I wonder if he thought that through. I bet you he had. That his last words would be, after a word from...
Well, let's have a listen.
The end of a testing over from Lily, full of hostility. Close fielders still grouped round the bat, but safely and capably survived by Boycott and Gar. 72 for 2, 28 now, Boycott, 18 Gar. The applause was for John Arlott, his last commentary. And Trevor, the entire Australian fielders clapping, Jeff Boycott having a clap there, I'm sure the entire ground clapping at that announcement. A moment indeed of nostalgia and a very nostalgic match.
So obviously that's the over after John Arlott's last commentary, and you heard the PA very clearly saying John Arlott has done his last commentary.